All right, so today we are going to talk about the concept of a delayed job. We're going to get into understanding the ways that we can take the work that we've been doing and think about what are priority things that should happen and what are things that we can kind of hand off to be done later. Before we get into the details of how to implement that, I want to talk about the concept of synchronous and asynchronous work. So who here has heard the word asynchronous before? Everybody pretty much. So what do we know about asynchronous, like an asynchronous action versus a synchronous action?
It's going to happen on its own.
So asynchronous or synchronous happening? So asynchronous is something where it's happening outside of like a timeline of, yeah, on a separate level or a parallel time frame, right? Whereas a synchronous action taking place, it's happening as the time is going on, right? Like so an example of, is the example I wanted to bring up. So the example of synchronous work might be, so if in both scenarios you need to eat, right? Synchronous would be you cooking yourself dinner, right? You have to spend the time to make the food and then you eat the food, right? Asynchronous would be you ordering delivery and having that food come to you, right? While that food is being cooked, you're doing whatever you need to do, and then when the food is done, it's at your door and then you can eat, right? The time that it took for, like in both scenarios, food is getting made, but in one scenario, you can't do anything else but cook at that time. Whereas if you're, getting delivery done, you can, put your order in and then you can do whatever else you need to do. And then when that food is there, then you're getting to eat, right? So it's kind of like the two scenarios that you would have for work being done synchronously or asynchronously. And as we get to having more and more things done with our Rails app, so we're going to be focused on looking at our public art app that we've been using for the past few days. So in that scenario, we had built a service object to help with the work being done for creating a location. So when we have a location that gets created from public art, does everybody remember what this one looks like? So if I do, I probably need to bundle install first and then get all that stuff set up. But when a location is created, right, we created a service object to kind of deal with that. We're calling on that object to do some stuff, right? In addition to that, we were having that object, services. We were also having that job send a text message, right? And that was all happening in the same context of creating that location, right? So there's a few things that we're getting done immediately in that moment before moving on. But as we grow our apps, we might end up having 5 up to, a bunch of different tasks that need to happen in order for something to be created or deleted, or whenever some event happens on your app. You might have a few services happening, right? And those might or might not need to be done immediately, right? Because we don't necessarily, we'll see that our server will be tasked with further performance issues if we're trying to get all 5 to 10 things done at the same time as a person just wanting to see that it was loaded, or where that redirect is going to happen, right? And we don't want to burden our app with doing that much stuff all at the same time if it doesn't need to be done. So some examples of some actions that might happen are like sending a newsletter, right? We have hundreds of people signing up, thousands of people signing up for our app, and they need to get an email confirmation sent out. In addition, they need to be signed up or subscribed to this newsletter that they've been added to. There's some text message that goes out to ask them for their feedback already. There's some report statistics that's going to our business managers about like how many new users have signed up, for example. And then there might be some files that need to be generated and downloaded for the user to sign or something like that. One thing I noticed, for example, when I added myself to have a 1Password, it generates a PDF for me to have, so it has like my secret key on it and that kind of stuff, right? Like that stuff has to be generated and created and then sent out to the user, right? So all of those things are going to bulk up the performance of our app. So what we're going to do today is figure out how to translate some of these tasks that don't need to be done immediately into jobs. Okay. So putting it into a job means that we're going to end up queuing it so that it's not something that's going to be done immediately. It's going to be queued and performed when we ask it to be done. Okay, done by somebody or a system that we set up in our Rails app called using active jobs, and they're going to be put into queues, and then when we set things up to be done, they'll be done at a later time or when the server has time or capacity to get that done. Okay, so any questions so far? Okay. So we moved our locations controller create to a service object. We have our create location service, and what we're going to do is try and make the location creation action a little bit faster. So all the essential tasks for creating the location we're going to keep, and then what we're going to do is we're going to move this text message process into a queue because it doesn't need to be done immediately, right? It can be done when the server has a moment to do it, and then that person would subsequently get the text message saying that this location was created, okay? Or to go check it out or that kind of thing, right? So in order for us to do that, we need to create a delayed job. So jobs are typically things that should just be like it's one tiny task that needs to be done. And it should invoke some kind of model or service action, right? That's typically what is described as a job, okay? So we're going to create a new job here in our app inside of jobs. So I'm just going to create a new file called text admin job.rb. Oh, job. Inside of jobs. Come on, Randall, Wheel of Death. And then what we're going to do is make sure that we have a spec file as well in our specs. Looks like we're going to need to make a folder for that as well. So new folder, jobs, and then in that text admin job, spec RB. Okay. So our spec file might look very similar to the text or create location service tests. We're saying that our text admin job should send a text message and then allow text messenger to receive messenger. It says messenger. And then the one like new function that you'll see here, the new method called PerformNow, So there's a few in terms of active job, there's a few methods that we are able to get when it comes to our working with active job. So it's another way to do that. So we just wrote this information out manually, but you can also generate a job through Rails generators. It's just going to create those two files that you need anyway. A job in the jobs folder, in your app jobs folder. Okay. And then we're going to basically add this information into our job for text messenger. Okay. Is not right? So let's get that set up in our actual job. We have our tests ready for that. But in here, we're going to inherit from application job or active job as we know it, right? Just like we have our other things inheriting from our other active models and active record and all that. Right, it should say messenger, text messenger, text message, or it's the job text messenger, okay? So queue as default is basically just saying like run the queue as whatever normality there is for our queue. There are other ones that we can utilize like highest priority, lowest priority. As we grow our app, there might be some jobs that are more important than others, right? So whenever somebody gets to it, you know, like create that report, right? That might not be as important as making sure that every new user gets their newsletter, right? In terms of the larger scheme of our business. So that would be where you would change that queue as, just giving a flag for like a higher or lower priority. At this point, we're just saying like this is a regular job, so just do it whenever you have the time. Don't prioritize it or deprioritize it under any other. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, if you start with queue, like what if the queue is in order?
Cool. Yeah, that's actually one thing that I should talk about a little bit. So when we are talking about work that's being done, there are two things that are happening. There are so actually, then maybe we don't need to talk about stacks and heaps right now. But ask me your question again about like understanding what a queue is.
No, I know what a queue is. I was just wondering like what is queue default? Is it just, like,
so queue as yeah, so queue as default is really just saying like so
yeah, that's what my question. What is default? Like, I know what
default is a symbol in Rails for active job that determines the time frame that the job is going to be queued up.
Oh.
So queue as default is really just going to say like just do it as like whatever order when you have spare time. Queue as meaning like otherwise in queue as you can have highest priority, lowest priority. I think those are the only other two options, but we can dive into the specs in more detail. But you're largely just going to leave that as default unless you have multiple jobs that are going to need to be prioritized, which means that when I queue up things, however big the queue is, put this one at the top of the stack and do this one first. When jobs are being run, and we'll see this in a little bit, a person or a thing that's going to be taking the jobs on and actually running those jobs it's going to just take whatever one is at the top, right? And just get them done in any regular order, right? But if you see that you want to make sure that some jobs are done first and prioritize over the others, this will enqueue it, meaning put it on the top of the stack as opposed to putting it at the bottom of the stack, or whenever it's queued up to just like put it as, you know, the next thing to be done. Or the, I guess I'm not sure what the order is in terms of a job queue, but I would assume that just like a queue is different than a stack, right? A queue is like waiting in line, right? You're the last person to enter in the line, so you're going to be dealt with last, right? That last in, first in, first out, okay? First in, first out versus a stack, which is last in, first out, right? Like a stack is when you put the pancake you made last, you put it on the top of the stack, right? The pancake stack. Okay, so think of a queue as a line, and a stack as pancakes.
So I guess the default being a symbol is defined in the application job class.
Yes.
Inherited.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's in there somewhere. We could probably go find it.
Yeah. So we can look in the documentation in terms of like what options you have for queue as. At this point, you're not going to really need to use that. But if you wanted to play around with it and just be like, the text message is the most important, right? And then you might have another one where you use active mailer, for example, and you would want to queue that as a job as lowest priority. So you'll see that once you run a bunch of these jobs and those get queued up, you'll see what gets risen to the top to get done first will be what you put as highest priority, whereas things are left as queue as default will just be put under those high priority jobs. And then vice versa, if you have something that's low priority, they'll automatically get put to the last part of the queue to be done last. Yes, it is like TSA pre-check.
Yes.
of Rails app tasks. Okay. But yeah, good question. I don't, and I need it in my life. Ooh, man, y'all get all the things.
Your ID number, your DoD ID number is your PSA number.
Hot tips.
Automatic.
Yeah, you can just put your number.
Just go through
your ticket, and then you get a ticket. But like,
Nice.
Or when you book, like on your TSA pre-check number, put in your DoD ID number. It's probably still the same as long as you're still
in the system.
Reserved. I don't know.
Word.
Off active duty, I lost it.
Well, this is all very good, important information. So now. Feel very jealous right now. Yes.
It's an hour versus 5 minutes.
So yes, perfect example for beating the queue to highest priority, right? Y'all would, if you were a job for getting on the airplane, you would set yourself as highest priority. Okay. Some other things that you'll see in terms of methods that you're getting or inheriting from active job are PerformNow, PerformLater, and you see that here in, oh, I guess we don't see it yet. Oh, you have perform. But the method that you have available for the job, actually, I think we'll do that when we actually run the job. PerformLater just says that this is a job that needs to be queued. And we'll see that in a minute. So let me just make it happen. So for our tests, so we should expect that this test should run. So let's oops. Let me just make sure all this stuff has happened. While we're getting that done, we're going to run this spec and confirm that it works. And we're going to actually add a new test once we run this. So this is just running text admin job itself and just saying that this is going to, in fact, perform this job spec. Okay, cool. Carrell spec. Well, I gotta turn off my errors or the warnings that Ruby opt.
Yeah, I want to, oh, okay, I don't do that. I don't know, I get that all the time. Yeah.
We did it.
Yeah.
I saw you do
I don't
it.
know what we did.
Uninitialized constant text messenger. I didn't change it. Messenger, oh. Yeah. I feel like I should change it to text messenger instead of text messenger. Messenger. Okay, so let's look at our, so that's the spec. So let's look at what we have in our code actually before we change spec. Let's look at our app. Inside of services. For its location, messenger is there. Okay, so we have text messenger. So that works there. Then we need to change it in our job. Text messenger, right? Did I write that right? Messenger. Let's confirm that in our services. Yep, text messenger. Okay, cool. Where's text messenger written? That's here.
Wasn't it in the messenger?
Huh.
Messenger.
I know, it's everywhere. Text messenger is written here. Asynchronous fixing. Okay, cool. It's in our models. There we go. I'm just going to rename this just so we have it all fixed. Text messenger. Text messenger. Text messenger. Okay, so in our spec now, let's make sure that that's all set up appropriately. Cool. And then our jobs spec should also reflect that messenger. Oops. Messenger. 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 All right, that all works valid, right? Looks good to y'all, looks good to me. Let's confirm that it runs. So yeah, if we wanted to make sure that we removed all of these warnings, I think I might have commented it out in my, we'll double check after we run this, or I'll make sure that it's not running the wrong way. All right, cool. So we have our stuff running.
When you say some a second, it means when you're loading the browser.
Say it again, what were you saying?
When they say like you're running this for like a second, is that mean when you're, yeah, like whatever you run, I mean, this one is for the, when they say like the time like a second, when it's like, when we say, okay, when you go for the browser and like upload the browser, I mean, open the browser and take like a second to load.
Oh, the files took 8.15 seconds to load?
Yeah, in the browser, or this one is like, what the time mean?
I believe that this is saying like all the generation of all the files that need to be loaded in order for the tests to run took this long, and that running the tests in total took this long.
But then, is there anything to do with the like website?
No, it doesn't have to do with the browser. But we can go on a deep dive at another time about in terms of like understanding our spec performance. That's totally something that's useful to know at some point. But for now, I want to make sure y'all get used to understanding what jobs are. So we have our text admin job right here, okay? And we want to make sure that we can change our existing test for the creates location service, because what we want to do is remove the creates location test that is going to specifically talk about like this actual job. Text messenger. So in our services create location spec, instead of sending a text message this one, we're not going to have that send the message itself, right? We're going to confirm that the creates location service object is setting up a queue or a job to be queuing for the text message to be sent later by text messenger. Does that make sense to everybody? So right now, what we're doing is kind of moving apart the responsibility of create location. So that create location is basically just calling on text messenger to do that work deferred to them, as opposed to have create location doing all the work directly themselves. Make sense? So instead of it sending a text message, we're going to replace that with it enqueuing a text message. just clean this up a tiny bit. Hopefully, hopefully I didn't remove scribe call view. Or I might have. Let me double check that I didn't. Oh no, I was right. Okay. Okay. Okay, so in order for us to make sure that this test passed, we're going to change create location service object to not just send the text message itself, but to queue the job to happen later. Okay, so as you probably noticed from this spec, we're going to call PerformLater on text admin job so that that queues the text message to happen whenever the job is able to get done. So if we look at our actual creates location method, we have send text message here doing this work where it's creating a new text message and then running all this information. So instead of us having it do this work, we are going to change it to this. Okay, so we're basically saying when send text message needs to be run, we're calling on text admin job to perform later this location. So then text admin job gets called, which is over here. Okay, so then text message gets sent here. It takes on the location, and then it runs the actual process of sending the text message. Okay, so
you only have one method inside of that class.
Right now, we only have one method inside of this class.
Like you don't have to call the form, or perform_later apply to your. It's kind of confusing because like PerformLater sounds like some like generic thing, but basically you're running like an _later on the perform method.
I believe that's pretty much accurate, but so right now in our text admin job, we have a method called perform, whereas in our creates location, when we call text admin job, we're asking for it to perform later. Perform later is for sure a method of active job, but in terms of it translating or understanding that perform later actually means to run perform like at a particular time, not really.
Perform later is also PerformNow. PerformNow with a bang. With a bang. Those are all time settings. So that's
sure.
The text admin job and you want _ whatever time it is now, later, and the perform is just an arbitrary name. Perform later is that queues up like when it's going to run, but it also when it does run, it's formed.
So this method is actually going to be the time it actually gets done. That's the active, right? Like this is performing right now.
So later is just set to some amount of time.
Mm-hmm. And it's probably assuming to like be related to this queue as or it might be. It's particularly utilizing active jobs. Well, so perform later, running perform later is probably telling active job to actually in-queue the job, right? Whereas when that job needs to be done, it's going to run the method perform.
So it has to be both perform. It's whatever you're defining, right? That does have to be performed. That's how it's going to be confused. It sounds like job has to be done. So this method always has to be called perform.
There can only be one method here.
Oh, and when it comes to just creating jobs like this, again, we're getting into like, if people are super confused, this is like much more advanced. But essentially what's happening with this job thing is that it just calls a service up, all it's supposed to do. Like it's just saying like, I'm going to perform this service up and that's specific. That's all it's going to do. But yeah, it doesn't need to perform. Similarly, when you create service objects, the convention is that it's dot call. But job needs to be
Performed.
So that's kind of weird. Like, what if you had 3 methods in there and you're passing different variables to each method? How would you do that? In the same scheduler, that wouldn't be in the same schedule. You just put it in different schedules.
ask the question.
If you have like a perform method, what if you're making another method that needs 2 variables? So I'm passing 2 variables.
Like it doesn't take as many variables as you need. I think that's being called. And you can do something before then, like in your performance, you call another method to like ready your data or something.
It seems like you can also utilize a set of things around the process of performing the job itself. So you have these callbacks here where you can set like before in queue, make sure this stuff is happening. After the thing is queued, do this. And then before actually performing the task, run a few of these things, or maybe log some stuff, right? Around the perform, and then after perform. So there are things that you can do if you want to think about the actual logic of the task of that job being performed. Active job definitely gives you the capability of getting that detailed in terms of what you want to have done. But what you should know for right now essentially is that when you want to have a job that you want to have queued for later, not done right now, right? You're going to create a job in a jobs folder in your app. You're going to have it inherit from active job or application job at this point. You're going to have one perform method in it. You're going to set some kind of queue as, just to set an understanding of like how high or low a priority this job is. And then inside of that perform method, you're going to say like, when this job is performed, this is what you should do, okay? And then on a service job, a service object, and you're going to call perform later or perform now or perform, like you're going to set when that job should be done by calling it within the service object that needs to happen. So you're calling on that job in itself, and you're going to say perform later with this information. You're going to pass that information on. It's going to basically be put in an envelope and sit there and wait until there's a job queue that is ready to take on that task of completing that job. Make sense to everybody so far? Okay. All right, so let's make sure that this is all running appropriately.
What are the kind of things would you want to like queue up like that in terms of, like most times you're interacting with the website, you kind of like you're expecting it to like be working on your own stuff, right? So what else? What would you be as the
customer?
As the server,
end user?
No, not the user. I'm talking about the person who's like the web dev or whatever.
Okay.
How do you like what other stuff do you queue up besides?
There's a lot of things. So like for example, when you create a profile, or when you want to, this happens to me a lot where I want to download all of the history of my data. So like every once in a while, like Google Checkout, Facebook, Instagram, all these things have a function that allows you to download all your stuff in case you want it to keep it, right? Archive it or whatever. Or if you want to archive an account or delete an account or add somebody to a newsletter, you want to generate a report, you want to see if there's any other things that I can think of. You want to, like your monthly statement, for example, for your bank, that stuff's particularly done at certain times of the day, of the year, of the month, right? So why would I have to do that all the time when in reality I can just queue that up to be done at certain increments of the month? So my server knows that I need to have time at a certain time of the month to get all those things sent out, right? Newsletters, podcasts, right? All those are all done at some kind of incremented time, right? People launch their podcast, a new thing gets queued up to be launched on Mondays, for example. Think about MailChimp, for example. In MailChimp as a company, they're getting all like hundreds and thousands of people saying like, I want my emails sent to this group of people at this particular time. Okay, great. I'm not going to send it right now. I'll send it on Tuesday, right? So I would set up a job for that thing to be done later on Tuesday. And then maybe those are all queued up for a particular time. And then MailChimp, every day that they have their like 20,000 clients that want to get their emails sent out on Tuesdays, will send the Tuesday mail out, right? Or every hour. For example, if you've ever thought about like when you send an email through Gmail and there's that undo button at the top that gives you like up to 30 seconds to undo your email, right? That in itself should tell you that they're not immediately sending that email. We are all not that special, right? In reality, those are messages that are getting queued up to be sent out at an increment of time. There's probably a lot of things that go on with our emails to like confirm that the stuff gets uploaded in the time that it needs to, confirm that you're not sending some kind of like bomb threat or I don't know what. Like there's all these different things that might happen to your email, right? Before it actually gets sent out to another person. If you've ever tried to like send an email to yourself and you're like waiting, like why did I not get it yet? Because I just sent it right now. Right? In reality, there's a bunch of stuff that's happening in the background before that actually gets sent out. So that is the action of jobs happening in the background, right? And being queued up for them to be sent out in batches. It's much more performance for things to be done in batches when it's that kind of minuscule task kind of things, so that you can have a better understanding of the performance of your app as a whole, right? In addition, you're having another, so we'll get to this part of like you'll have another server that's dealing with this kind of work. So right now, we've been playing with our app and we have it running on Puma's server right now, right? This is our Rails server that's running and doing stuff for us, okay? So if, for example, we go to localhost 3000 and then, hello, brother Zingo, okay. We're at our, can I log in? Do I have to sign up? I don't have to. Let's register for the public art tracker. Okay. Kara at Kara.codes. Okay. Sign up. Wonderful. So even that, right? Like I might want to send a mailer out saying like, hey, thanks for signing up for our thing. If you'd like to subscribe to our newsletter, do that, right? And then if I actually did, it might take me to another page. And that's a whole nother job that needs to happen, adding me to the mailing list, right? But for now, I just want to go here. I don't want to wait for that whole process to happen. And neither does my server, okay? So the thing that we set up was so that if I wanted to create like, women, let's see, 16th and Blue Island, artist Sam. So we set it up so that our things are going to send out a text message saying that the it worked. Success. So I got a text message saying that, yeah, I don't know if y'all can't see it, but it says sent from your Twilio trial account, because obviously we're on trial status right now. It says sent from your Twilio trial account. The location Powerful Women was just added. Go vet it, right? From my text message email thing, right? So if we look at our server, let's see. So this is the cool thing about our logs, right? So we went and we created a person in the email, in our account list, right? So we updated our users. We redirected to the homepage, right? We created a get. We got the index. We showed it to the user. That's awesome. Then I asked for the get to create a new location, right? So a form was created. I mean, a form was shown to me as the user, right? So rendered all this stuff. And then I made the post, okay? There's our actual data, Powerful Women, address, description, okay? And then it actually inserted it into our locations, okay? Boom, here's our new stuff, right? Active job, enqueued text admin job. So it created a new job for to happen, right? So it enqueued the job and it redirected to the location. It didn't do the job, it queued it up, right?
Was that async default? Is that the default time?
Yeah. So asynchronously, just like whenever you have time, get it done, right? If we were to change that to like highest priority, this queue might have happened immediately or something. Or lowest, it might, I don't know what the difference might look like. That change would probably look more interesting if we had like 10 different jobs happening, right? But right now we only have one. So, but by default, it's gonna say like, here's the arguments of information that you need for it to happen. There's a location, as we mentioned, okay? It redirected us to the show page for our location, okay? Then it showed us the location. It made that get page, okay? It's rendered the location. Then that's when the actual text happened. See here, it says performing text admin job at this time. So at that point, it was already rendering all the next stuff to me on the page. It took that long for the queue to, for somebody to pick up that queue and actually perform the job, right? Just like here at the end, it says, here, now I'm done. Performing, now performed, done. Okay, so that sped up the process for, instead of that text message to be a part of that process of all the way up here. Okay, now instead of it being up here, now it's like further down the line, just like do it when you're ready, right? And me getting to the next page is more important to the server, right? But imagine this happening, 100 times over, right? I'm not the only one adding things. This is a new, like, get all your public art on the internet day, and there's like 5,000 people adding things, right? And there's like one person getting text messages every like 5 seconds, right? Instead, that's like might be a lot, right? Maybe I want to queue that up to something else to say like, what if that job was more like, here are the last 10 things that were added at every hour or something like that. Maybe I wanted the queue to like hold up all that information and then send a text message that's more useful than just like every single time. That might be another reason why you would utilize a job, for example. But in the case that we want to look at this, if I shut down my server and we wanted to, let's say I shut down my server, obviously nobody would be getting any text messages if a new location was created, right? At this point, technically, we wouldn't be able to create a location, but that's not as reliable as we want it to be, right? We want to make sure that we have things that are going to stay on, even if we are getting other things done. To allow us to do that, there are different what are called queue adapters. And I kind of speak to that here. Okay. So jobs, as Rails says, jobs are running in the background, right? So these are things that we don't want. They're not necessarily a part of the process of Rails running your app in itself. They're things that can be done later, right? Not right now. So they're running in parallel to your actual server. That requires another server for that to happen, okay? So the better way and more standardized way of using active job is by utilizing, basically there's queuing services for processing these jobs. And the one that we're gonna look at right now is Rescue. There's a few other ones. I've never heard of these other three, but Sidekick is very popular. Rescue is another popular one. And I feel like in here there's actually some talk of one actually being called Delayed Job in itself. This thing as a whole is the concept of delayed jobs in itself. But I think somebody was trying to be like very specific and called their gem delayed job, which is very random. But anyway, these are basically queue adapters. Okay, so in order for us to utilize a queue adapter, what we're gonna do is change our adapter information. Where did I just see that? Here we go. So we're basically going to change the queue adapter from what it is normally to Rescue itself. So in order for us to do that, we are going.
Rescue run
as many as you create. That's exactly what we're about to do. So,
is it not possible to just like assign a single thread to handle jobs or something like that? Or
well,
you just have the rest handle standard app. So maybe
that's also kind of what we're about to get into. So what we're doing is we're asking one server to just hold off on stuff. We're just basically deferring something to happen until later, but the same server is doing that work, right? So if we want to unburden our server to actually do things in parallel and push things off for another like dedicated server to make sure all these processes are happening, it puts a lighter load on the server itself to run the application. It also allows us to like have a separation of concerns. So that's kind of where most companies at this point, when you're starting to build jobs and delaying them to be done in parallel, they have the capacity and understand that those are things that we would want to have separated, right? So that way we also have the process of if we need to do maintenance on our current app server, that the jobs can still be making their work happen. Those are going to be really important cases for having those things happen. But as you'll see now, if we're doing this, we'll realize that, there's a lot of things that are going to be going on at the same time, and running them all in the same place is going to be really annoying to look at, as we'll see just right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to change some information in our config. Yeah, we'll just do it. So you can put this config initializers and then jobs.rb. Alternatively, on the Rails side, it's saying that you can set this up in config application.rb. So that would be something you would put in here. Actually, I think I'm going to do that this way. Is there a reason why having a jobs file is that like particular for foreman or? Oops. Okay. Yeah, I'll talk about it in a second. I was just double checking whether like why there was a reason we didn't put it inside of application.rb. So what we're going to do now is we're going to utilize Rescue to run the tasks that we were having the server itself do. We're going to separate that out so that Rescue in itself is the one that will be the one to kind of manage those jobs happening on a separate server. It will allow it to be more dedicated to only doing jobs, and then the app can just focus on running the app. Okay? So what we have to do is set Rescue up as a gem. So we would add that to our gem file. So I'm just going to throw it right here. Rescue, it's like QUE. Okay. All right. And then we're going to bundle install that. So for now, I'm going to cut this server. Bundle install. And that'll get our Rescue gem in our gem file all nice and installed. So the two ways that I just showed setting up our job adapter, so or job queue adapter, is either setting it up directly inside of config application.rb, which is how Rails Guide says to do it, or you can create a config/initializers /job.rb, jobs.rb file inside of your initializers folder, and then you would just set this one line. Come on. You would set up this one line of code inside jobs.rb. Oh, I see. So it's doing the same thing. Config active job. So instead of calling rails.application.config or rails.application here in a jobs file, so that's like the full way of doing it inside of initializers /jobs.rb. You can do it inside of the config file, the application file in config, and do it that way. That makes sense to everybody? You'll see it in your README with capital Rails, or in your in the curriculum today. You'll see it capital rails.application.config.activejob.queue adapter, or you can do it this way. Both ways, totally valid. Makes sense to everybody? Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we're also going to allow Rescue to set up their tasks inside of our rake file. So we're going to go to our rake file, which is where we get all of our tasks done. Okay, so not just require relative here, but we're also going to require Rescue tasks. Okay, so it's probably going to shift some information about what we can do with our Rails tasks. Use some rescue. Yeah, so now we have rescue some stuff here. Okay. All right, so let's run our tests again and see what's going on. How do I remove this? All right, so there's a few tests that are failing, and they're particularly around saving the record and marked as successful. The error we're getting is that it's saying that Redis cannot connect. There's an error connecting to Redis. So one important thing about Rescue is that it requires Redis to work. And that's something that we didn't install yet. So when you are installing Rescue, you also have to install Redis. They work hand in hand. And Redis is basically a server that it's like a dedicated service that a lot of job systems utilize in order to run parallel with another application server running. Okay, and you'll see that with Sidekick or many other like multi-threaded job type things. They're going to be using a Redis server. Okay, so in order for us to get Redis running, we need to actually brew install Redis. Redis is something that we want to have available to us outside of solely like our gem files. So we're actually going to brew install Redis. Similarly, you know, we had brew installed Postgres, for example, right? So it's something that we want to have access to on a more global level than just our gem files. So this might or might not take more than a second since Homebrew needs to do some updating. But while that's happening, we can look at some information about Rescue. So if you were to decide like, oh, I want to use Rescue, or I want to look at another adapter like Sidekick or something like that, there is access to looking at some information about how those particularly work. So this has a pretty good, although this is Rails 4.2, so although it should be the same given that we're working with Rails 5, if there are any issues, oh, here we go, see. That might be something you'll want to do. So we've already done some of these tasks, right? We have gem rescue. We configured our queue adapter to be set to rescue. We set rescue tasks. We want to probably get this set up. So I will add that to our task rake file. Okay. All right, still working a little bit. And then this is talking about if you were doing this fresh, right? You can Rails generate a job, as I mentioned before. It'll create an app jobs folder, and then it'll create some information. I don't know that it will necessarily set this up. It might. But again, every job has a perform method. When you set that up, first you can set it as high or low or default priority for queuing as, and then you would write a function or a method that tells active job or rescue in this case what to do when you actually need to perform this job, right? Take these arguments and do some stuff, right? And that will deem it as a completed job once that is finished. Here are some examples for how you would run or how you would ask the job to be queued. So you either set perform later, you can perform, you can say wait 1 week to perform later, or you can say perform now. Okay. We're going to be at this step when we get this done. Sweet. Okay, so now we have Redis all ready to go. Redis to go. Okay, so we have those pieces set up. Now we can just run Redis server. Redis, oops, server. Yeah, it's fancy. That's our little virtual Redis server. Okay. Yeah, ASCII art. Okay, so we have our Redis server running, and now if we want to actually run our application server, we do Rails, erails s. Okay, so now I have two things, and now I want to have my other one here. So I'll let that run while this is running. So this is like, I'm ready to do the job. Just let me know when I need to do a job, right? And then this one is going to run the actual application. And this one is going to be here for me to, if I need to do any other stuff here.
So it's a single thread.
Right now, there's 2 threads, but they're running. Yes. Well, yes. And I can't say for sure, but yes. Right now, we're using it in a single-threaded fashion, right? So we have our public art. We have our server running. Let's say I want a new location. Let's see. What's my favorite? My favorite park. And parks are art in itself. Okay. So we have our thing going on, and we have that stuff. We have our queued. I don't think anything happened here. But if I wanted to do Rails spec, double check that our bundle install. Okay, so if we see our test should be passing now that we have Redis up and running. Did I actually get my text message? That's a good question. I have not gotten my text message yet. So I have not gotten my text message yet. So in order for us to actually run rescue as a second process dedicated to working the tasks, we have to make sure that rescue is actually doing its job. Like, we haven't really turned it on to do its work, right? Our application did the work of saying, like, I queued up these jobs, but they're not actually being performed. As you can see here, I only have my last text message, okay? So in order for us to actually have the jobs work, we have to run this command. Okay, so yes, we have our stuff not failing. So queue, brake, environment, rescue, work. Okay. So I'm gonna run that. And then I get my next tweet finally. Okay, because rescue actually went and did the work. Okay. But as you probably see here, we have this running rescue, we have this running the application server, and we have this running a Redis server, which is required for rescue to run, okay? Which now is becoming really annoying, if you haven't noticed. Terminal windows, running all of our stuff, and then we want to, like, I need a new one to make sure, oops, I need a new tab here so that I can just, like, run commands, right? That's not going to work, and it's not sustainable. So what we would be utilizing in this case, when we realize that we have a bunch of things that need to be running in parallel, is a system called Foreman. And I know this is something that we had talked about in the past. Foreman was something that did get run. I can't remember what we were using it for particularly right now. I know it's another system that we were using that was using Foreman. But Foreman, just like you would think about what an actual foreman does, is they're kind of like the overseer of all the tasks that need to be done. And Foreman kind of gives us that capability of doing that. So what we're going to do is set up what is called a proc file in our Rails app. And we're going to basically say, these are the 3 things that need to get done. And the foreman will know what to do based on this proc file. So we're going to create cd public. Okay, so in here, we're going to create a file, proc file. Okay. Oh, it's actually in here. Okay, so now we have this file called the proc file. And then in the proc file, we're basically going to say, these are 3 threads of work that I want to have done at the same time. Okay, we have Redis running Redis server, we have our web running our actual web app, and we have a worker that's rescue doing the work of the jobs that we queue it up to do. Okay, Foreman's going to take this information and it's going to orchestrate all of this stuff happening. Okay, so that is going to require us to have gem install Foreman. And then we're going to just say Foreman. Oh, I should probably stop all this stuff first. So there you go. cut all these off, cut this off. Okay, so now instead of me watching all three of these threads happening, we're going to say form and start. And now we see our Redis server started, our web service started, and our worker service started. Okay, so on one setup, we're going to have all of these things happening. So that is something you see when you start Rails server, right? Now, the difference you'll see here is that now instead of us using localhost 3000, we're using localhost 5100. So if I go over here and I try and look at this, it's actually not there anymore, right? So if I go to 5100, there's our app. Okay, now if I go here and I create a new Puerto Rican flag, California. Okay, so now when I run that and I look at my system here, I've immediately gotten that text message. Okay, so and if we look at our system here, we have our web running all of the stuff that needs to get done. We have Redis doing its work that needs to do, and I don't see where the worker is doing its work, but it definitely queued the job, and it sent me the text message. So now Foreman is basically saying, like, I'm gonna handle all the things that need to be done, or I'm gonna like handle making sure that all three of these servers, or all three of these services basically, are running as they need to. And I'll like get it all, I'll let you know in one thread what's happening. Okay.
What was the line that sent everything to rescue? In terms of drops to the rescue? I mean, in terms of the actual code.
The queue, that was done in our, oh, that's spec. So in our app, we had our creates location. We're telling text admin job to perform this later. That's going to create a queue for the text admin job to perform when it's ready to be performed. When rescue can do it whenever it's ready to do that, then it runs text messenger new and actually performs this task of sending it out.
Or is it part that you over to rescue?
That was in creates location. PerformLater.
Okay. So where it calls on, like where in your code it says you pass the job keys to rescue, so then.
So, oh, that was in our config in initializers. So our config file that we set up in application. So config application, we said for active job, we're going to use the queue adapter rescue as opposed to a default active job queue. So at default, it just uses its own. So this is saying like rescue is going to be the one to handle the jobs. And rescue is being run through this proc file, queue, bundle, exec, rake environment, rescue, work. So this is where the worker is happening.
We can actually copy out from now and from later, they are set to rescue at one time or for the person.
So if we did a bunch of jobs, I'm trying to think of another job that we would set up here. If we wanted two jobs, like if there were multiple jobs happening, you're asking which one would be done first?
Yeah, they send them to
They're
rescue at
all sent to rescue, and then they're put in a queue. So whatever was the first one to be put in the queue will be done, unless there's some change in queue as where it's saying higher or lower priority. They're all going to be done in the order they were received.
so they send them all at once. Then the queue.
Yeah, so there's a queue that will do them as they have the time to do them. So on the scale that we're looking at this, it might not look like this is important, but when you get to having thousands and thousands of users who are, for example, like wanting to delete their accounts, and you have to like wipe a whole bunch of stuff, or you need to like generate a report, or all of those things that might take a lot of server time and effort, you would be doing your server a disservice not to think about how to give them less work to do and then to put those off for rescue to do them later. And then, you know, that priority would make a lot more sense for like what needs to get done immediately versus what can wait, or how can I bundle up the tasks that need to be done at particular time frames that maybe there's a lot less users. For example, I will set up all of my jobs to happen overnight so that I'm not so I'm not taking up too much power of my servers during the like heavy inflow of user activity, right? I want all that performance or all that stuff to be done optimized way. So I'm going to run all those generated reports to be done at 3 o'clock in the morning, right? And then I'll send them all out at 6 a.m. or something like that. If you think about a global scale of your app needing to be running at particular increments of time given your user's activity, what can be done later so that you're not utilizing all the power of your server at the highest time frames of activity.
But then you have to server, you actually have physical server, and you got one server. And
Good question. So right now, these are two like virtual servers, right? They're both being hosted on my laptop. When you deploy, and we'll talk about deployments tomorrow, you'll have a little more understanding of like the idea of things being deployed and hosted on servers that are not your own, right? Like we're not going to be local host anymore. We're going to be using other servers that are doing this work. The same things would apply, but you're not using your own space and your own computer's, performance. You're using another server, another physical server, right? And then those would be like a few virtual servers onto that physical server. Does that make sense?
yeah, but that's, I say this one is you have a virtual server because you pour everything in one app, but then you have two physical servers, and you have to have on both servers and how you can extend it.
Well, so just like we talked about HTTP protocol, right? Like our server is running on localhost at this port, right? And then we could be utilizing another port. There's nothing stopping us from being able to utilize two physically different services, even for doing this work, right? But right now we're just using two different communication ports on our own one server, but it's virtually utilizing two different pieces of our computer.
But what about the porting? If the porting is one server, like when all app package like you use just one server, like you have to keep both servers.
Your actual code would all be in one place for the most part. Yeah. Yeah. This might or might not be more clear for you tomorrow when we talk about deployment. Okay? Any other questions about jobs? Y'all ready to do the job of enabling jobs? Giving more jobs. Being Steve Jobs. Nobody? Okay, cool. And that is all for today.